friends, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. You may have seen the Halloween cards I recently shared over on my blog using Seth Apter's newest Sizzix release. And today I'm bringing those same techniques to life in a whole new way. This time I'm creating a mixed media Christmas card using Seth's new dies and embossing folder, paired with a few Tim Holtz favorites to build layers of texture, color, and sparkle. I'll be using Distress Oxides and embossing powders to create the background, embellishments, and overall design. But the best part is, these techniques work with any embossing folders and dies you may already have in your stash. So grab your supplies and let's get into it. I'll walk you through how to combine texture, shine, and color for a festive mixed media look that's perfectly grungy and perfectly Christmas. So for this card, I'm going to be working with some of the new dies and embossing folder from Seth Apter and Sizzix. And as I said in the intro, you do not need these dies or embossing folders to do this technique. You can use similar type dies from your stash and follow along with all the techniques I'm going to be sharing. So this first one is called Stretchers, and then also this larger one called Diamond District. And the embossing folder is called Grid Graph. I've also incorporated a couple Tim Holtz dies, the Gentleman's die set, and then the wreath here from this Christmas Vault die set. And then I also used the Tiny Text Christmas stamp set just for some sentiments, but again, any of these could be switched out for something similar from your stash. As for the mediums, I'm going to be working with, I've got some Distress Oxide sprays, and the colors here I have are Iced Spruce, Aged Mahogany, Rustic Wilderness, and Uncharted Mariner. And I also have the Distress ink pads in those same colors. So Aged Mahogany, Iced Spruce, Rustic Wilderness, and Uncharted Mariner. And I'm also going to be working with Archival ink in Black Soot. And I've got some embossing ink here. And then this Gilded Patina embossing powder from Seth Apter and Wow. So as far as any kind of substitutions, obviously you could switch any of these sprays and inks out to just regular Distress sprays or Distress inks. Any kind of spray inks would work if you have those, and any kind of inks would work as well for the techniques that I'm going to be doing. And I do recommend though some sort of a permanent waterproof ink though, because of the way we're going to be layering that on top of the other inks. And you don't want that to bleed or fade or anything like that, and this will show up because it's permanent and waterproof. I'm also going to be working with a brayer in the video, but if you don't have a brayer, I've got you covered, so you don't need to worry about having one if you don't. Now that we've had a look at all the supplies I'm going to be working with, let's get into it. So the first thing I did was take a piece of Distress watercolor cardstock that I cut down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I spritzed it with a little water, and then I placed it inside the Grid Graph embossing folder from Seth Apter and Sizzix, and then just embossed that paper. And now we're going to add some color to the background with some Distress Oxide sprays. And the colors here I've got are Uncharted Mariner, Iced Spruce, Rustic Wilderness, and Aged Mahogany. And you just want to make sure you give them all a good shake and get all that pigment mixed in before you start doing any spraying. That will help prevent some clogging. The first color I'm going to take is the Uncharted Mariner, and I'm just going to spritz that here down in this bottom corner. So I'm just going to kind of hold it a little bit closer so I kind of have a little more control of where the color is going. And now I'm going to add a little bit of the Rustic Wilderness here in the middle. And then some Iced Spruce up here, and maybe a little bit here. And I think I'm going to add a little bit more Rustic Wilderness right there. And then now I'm going to add some of the Aged Mahogany. And from here, what you can do then is add some water to kind of get those colors flowing a little bit more. If you want to add more color, you can just come in there and give it another spritz or so. And like I said, I'm just going to get a little water in, get those kind of spraying it where the colors are like next to each other to kind of help pull them together and blend that together. And then yeah, from here And if you want it to spread out a little bit more, you can also finger paint a little. Just the nature of the fact that we're using red and green together, you are going to get a little bit of a brownish tone if those two mix together. I also like to wipe off the nozzles on the spray bottles too before I'm finished with them. Just again, just to kind of help prevent with the clogging. And now we're just going to give this a dry. And if you're getting some of that ink like kind of pooling on the sides, you can kind of just tip it a little bit and spread it around or dab it off onto the paper towel. I like to use a paper towel underneath in my splat box just to absorb all that extra ink. And as you can see, this one is well loved. Been using it for a while. It's probably about time for a new one. And we're just gonna give this a good dry. Now for this next step, once that's all dry, we're going to apply some ink over the top of this embossing folder. There's a couple ways you can do that. You can either use a brayer, or you can go directly to the paper with your ink pad. It's really just a matter of personal choice. If you're going to use a brayer, you just want to kind of roll and lift to lift that ink off the ink pad and onto the brayer, and just roll and lift. So you're kind of pushing, rolling, lifting, and then you're going to do that same thing onto your paper. So you're just going to transfer it over like that. And then you can just kind of repeat that process of rolling and lifting. Or, like I said, you can take the ink pad and just, you're not pushing, you're just, once it's in, like lay it down on the paper and then just grab hold of it, don't push down, and just rub it. And unless your ink pad is like super dried out, you're going to be able to transfer ink right over onto any of the raised areas of the embossed paper. And if you do happen to get it down into some other little areas here and there, I personally kind of like how that looks. So it happened a little bit here, so I may try to push down a little bit harder maybe in some other areas over here just to get a similar effect to happen. But like I said, so you can use the brayer or the ink pads directly to the paper. Either one will work. And with that, the background is finished for now. And then when it comes to cleaning off the brayer, you can clean it with like an archival ink cleaner, which will remove that ink, or you can just use some soap and water, whichever you prefer. So now we're going to go on to the die cutting. And for this, I just took several of the new Seth Apter dies, along with a couple of Tim Holtz favorites. And these are all cut, all the white paper is cut from scrapbook.com's white mixed media paper, which is a really heavy duty thick paper that is great for die cutting, especially these really thin intricate dies like these stretchers and border lines. So I've got all the inside pieces popped out now, and now we're going to do some heat embossing. And I'm going to take my embossing ink pad and just press it over the surface of this die cut so that you're just transferring that embossing ink over onto the paper. And you're not going to end up using this entire piece, but you can save the pieces that you don't use for another project if you like. But it's just a little easier to work with a whole big piece here. And I'm just going to place this piece of printer paper underneath there just to catch the embossing powder. And then there's a couple of embossing powders that I have in my stash that I thought would be really pretty for this. There's the Gilded Patina and the Dirty Verdi, but I think I'm going to go with the Gilded Patina. And with these embossing powders, because there's so many different sizes of powder in there that's all mixed up to create that finished embossed look, you kind of want to shake it before you start sprinkling it on so that you get a good mix of everything. And I'm just going to tap off some of that, and then we'll continue pouring on here. Might run out before I get to the whole thing here, as this is a big die. And then you can just, when you're all done, you just pour that excess back into the jar there. You made a mess like I did here, you can just wipe as much of that up into that paper as well to get it back in there. And now this, and then I've noticed too, like this embossing powder has a lot of glitter in it. So as we all know, that super fine glitter is pretty insidious. So it does tend to kind of get everywhere, but the finished look I think is so well worth it because it's just beautiful. And then if you've still got a lot of glitter around, you can take a little Swiffer duster and clean that up. And then from here, we're just going to use a heat tool to heat emboss this. Another thing that's super interesting about these embossing powders is how different they look when they are heat embossed and when they are not heat embossed. So this side is heat embossed and this side is not. This one has a much more of a red tone, and this one starts pulling out some of those kind of blues and greens. So when you're using these, don't be fooled by what you see when you pour it out and expect that that's what it's going to look like. So if you do get any of these, I highly recommend doing a swatch so that you aren't unexpectedly disappointed when you go to make a project and it doesn't, you pour it on to look like this, because maybe that's what it looks like more in the jar to you. But I feel like what it looks like in the jar is even different than what you get here, because it really shows more green in the jar. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so then once this is heat embossed, we can set this to the side and move on to the next layers. So now I've got the stretcher dies and the borderline die, and we're going to add some color to these. And again, you can use a brayer to apply the ink, or you can apply the color directly to the die cut. Just really kind of a matter of personal choice there. And with these super detailed dies, a sticky grid mat is super helpful because you can just pop these out and stick them to the mat, and then they won't move around on you and possibly tear. But if you don't have a sticky grid mat, I'm going to show you here another option. So if you've got the sticky grid mat, you can just stick your die down there, or you can leave it in the paper it was cut from. So that will kind of help hold it in place as well. And if you want to have even more security with that, if you've got like some mint tape or like any kind of a low tack tape. So if you've got a washi tape, you can run that along the back of that, and that will help hold it in place, kind of like the sticky mat here. And then from there, you can just take your ink and apply it to the die cut using either the brayer or the ink pad. All right, so with the brayer, you can, again, you're just going to roll and lift. Get that ink all over the brayer there. And I'm using oxide inks in Uncharted Mariner, Ice Spruce, Rustic Wilderness, and Aged Mahogany, so the same as the sprays that I use. And you're just going to roll it over the paper. So and it just transfers that ink onto the paper. And gives you that colored effect there. And so then when you pop this out, you're probably going to get like a little bit of a white line around the edge of the die cuts, which I think looks kind of cool. And I've noticed this is even more likely to happen when you're using like a thicker paper for some reason. When I use a thinner die paper, it didn't work I didn't get that same effect. And I don't know if it's because the thinner paper I had was just a different type of paper, because like this is a mixed media paper, and the other one I used was the Nina paper. So there's that one. And then you can also do the same thing here on the grip mat if you have one. So there you go. So there's that. Or like I said, you can peel that up. But again, you're going to get kind of that little bit of a white line around the edge with the brayer. And then I'm going to do one here where we're just going to go direct to paper with the ink pad. So again, just kind of lay it on there and just rub it over. I feel like you use a lot more ink when you do it this way, but maybe not. But you're not likely to get that same white edging that you get when you do it with the brayer. So, and I feel like you get an even more of a white edging when you leave it in the paper and do the brayer. So I think it's really just a matter of preference on like what look you like. But I think the white edging is just kind of something slightly different and unique. But just some options for how to color the die cuts with your inks. And if you don't have oxide inks, you can use Distress inks or whatever kind of ink you have. And I'm just going to continue on with that for these other die cuts and just do them with some different colors. One other thing I wanted to add, when you are switching colors with the brayer, you do want to make sure you wash this off, and you can either just wipe it off with a damp rag. A lot of times I will just spray the rag or spray a towel with a little bit of water and roll this on there and then wipe it off to clean it off. But you can also, if you have this particular brayer, you can pull it apart and remove the brayer and take it to the sink and wash it. But I usually go with the paper towel and spray bottle method because I don't want to get up and leave my, I don't want to get up, so it just makes it a little easier for me here. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep on keeping on here. So as far as like picking out what colors to make things, I sometimes will just kind of place them on my paper. Well, just kind of place them on my background and then just kind of play around with positioning and all that. And so what I've kind of come up with here is I've got the little zigzag one that's in the Uncharted Mariner, and then I've got the numbers here with the green, Rustic Wilderness, and then I've got the little ladder with the aged mahogany, and then I've got this other number one here, and I think what I'm going to do is do that one in Rustic Wilderness as well. And I've got my gentleman die cut here, and he's cut out of some black craft stock that has a texture to it. And you know, if you don't have any of the black craft stock, I have a video where I show how you can kind of make your own, but we'll get to that in a minute here. And then I've got the little wreath and the bow, and I'm going to do that in Rustic Wilderness and Aged Mahogany for the wreath. So that will kind of give me a little bit of like a transition, or just a little kind of carry through with the color. You could also do, probably could do the iced. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do this in the ice spruce as I'm kind of looking at things here. I think that's what I would like. So yeah, so we shall carry on with the coloring. All right, so I've got all my die cuts inked and heat embossed and my background done. And now I'm going to take that gentleman die and add a little bit of interest to that. And as I mentioned earlier, I had cut this from Distress black craft stock, and this is the textured one. So it's craft on one side and then printed with this black on the other side. And what I like about this is when you sand it, you just take a little smooth grit sandpaper. This is a Ranger sanding disc, but you can also use like sandpaper from the hardware store. And you just kind of rub it around the edges, and it will rub off that top layer and then give you this kind of distressed effect because it rubs off that layer, and then you can see the craft paper that's underneath. And this paper, the black, used to come in a pack all by itself, and that has been discontinued. I love the black paper, so I have recently kind of came across a way to make my own, and I've got a video where I share that, so I'll make sure to link that in the description box below if you haven't seen that and are interested in doing the same thing. So there we are. And now we are ready just to assemble everything. So what I'm going to do is just take my scissors and just kind of trim this down and, you know, just kind of cut along these lines. Because it's so imperfect of a design, you don't have to be like perfect with cutting out and using whatever pieces of this that you want to fill out your background. But I'm just going to kind of cut it so that it's, you know, kind of around this size here for my card. And then just kind of feel free to, once you kind of get it cut out the size that you want, then just feel free to, you know, just kind of take your scissors and mimic the rest of the pattern that's on there as you like. And then from here, it's just a matter of using, you know, whatever your favorite adhesive is to adhere these various layers onto your card. And if you realize like, oh, I need to trim a little bit more off, then do so. And then yeah, your card is ready to go. When it comes to assembling the card and adhering the die cuts to the embossed die cut, if you use that particular kind of embossing powder, because this has a lot of texture to it, I find glossy accents works really well to adhere things, because I was finding that just regular liquid adhesive was not cutting it for me. So I just thought I would share that with you. And then the last thing I did was for the sentiment, I stamped one of the sentiments from the Tim Holtz Tiny Text stamp set. I stamped it onto white cardstock, trimmed it into a strip and then into these little pieces here, and then just inked the edges with a little bit of brown Distress ink, and then I'll just add those to the card. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I brought a little grungy style to this Christmas card using Seth Apter's newest Sizzix release. If you want even more inspiration, be sure to check out my recent blog post where I shared my Halloween cards using these same dies and embossing folder. You'll see just how versatile these designs can be across seasons and styles. You can find links to all of the products I used in the description box below, along with a visual supply list for a quick look at everything. When you use these links to do your shopping, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so very much. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribed for more crafty inspiration, tips, and techniques. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.